This is a real story. My name is Evelyn Harrow. I'm 27 years old, and what I'm about to share still keeps me awake at night. It happened 2 years ago in a place I once thought of as home, a quiet little town with nothing but farmland, a single main road, and an old stone bridge everyone just called Hollow Bridge. People told ghost stories about it when I was younger, but I never believed them. That changed when someone hurt me, and my search for answers took me to the edge of that bridge, where something was waiting. This story is not for the faint of heart, and I'm telling it because I want you to understand how far darkness can reach when you open the wrong door. Make sure you subscribe, like, and share, and remember, this story is written and edited by Dark Life Side Diaries. It began on a night when the wind sounded like a living thing brushing against my windows as if it wanted in. I had been home for less than an hour after closing up the bookstore where I worked when I heard a knock at my back door. 3 slow knocks, evenly spaced. My heart jumped because nobody ever came to the back. It opened into a patch of woods, and the path was overgrown. When I pulled back the curtain, no one was there. Instead, lying on the porch boards was a crumpled, damp envelope with my name written in black ink that had run and bled into the paper as though it had been dropped into water. Inside was a single Polaroid photo of me standing by the hollow bridge, my face pale, my hair blowing in the wind. I had no memory of being there, not that day, not even that week. I thought maybe it was a prank, but the more I stared at the picture, the more I noticed something wrong in the background. Just under the arch of the bridge, between the shadows, there were 2 pale hands gripping the stone, and they weren't mine. I tore the photo in half, but that night I woke to the sound of dripping water somewhere inside the house. It wasn't coming from the kitchen or the bathroom. It was coming from my bedroom closet. The smell hit me before I even opened the door, damp, earthy stench like rotting leaves and river mud. My closet floor was wet, and on it were footprints, bare, wide footprints that led toward the back wall and stopped. I backed away and slammed it shut, my chest tightening when I heard a faint voice through the wall whispering my name. Evelyn. I stayed awake until dawn, every light on. The next day I told my friend Marissa, and she went pale. She told me about the legend, how decades ago a young man named Tobias Crowe had been accused of killing 3 women and hiding their bodies under Hollow Bridge. The townspeople chained him to a stone block and threw him into the river, but when they returned weeks later to move the bridge stones, the chains were empty and the water was still. Some said Tobias's ghost waited beneath the bridge for those who disturbed him. I didn't believe it until the next night, when I woke choking on cold water. My sheets were soaked, my pillow dripping, and my hair clung to my face as if I'd just been pulled out of a river. My ears rang with the sound of rushing water, but when I looked around, the room was bone dry except for one single wet footprint beside my bed. That was the moment I realized it didn't matter if I stayed away from Hollow Bridge. Whatever was there had already crossed over, and it wanted me. Didn't go to work the next morning. My body felt heavy, drained, like something had pulled the warmth out of me while I slept. My phone was buzzing with missed calls from Marissa, so I finally answered, my voice hoarse. She asked if I'd been to Hollow Bridge, and when I told her no, she told me she'd driven past it on her way to work and seen someone standing on top of the arch, staring straight at her car. She swore it looked like me, but the skin was too pale, the eyes too dark, and the mouth was twisted in a grin she had never seen on my face. She was so shaken she nearly ran off the road. I tried to laugh it off, but a pit was growing in my stomach. That night I moved the dresser against my closet door, telling myself it would keep me safe. But at 2:43 a.m., the sound of rushing water filled the room again, louder, this time almost deafening. The dresser began to vibrate, not like someone was pushing it, but like something was flowing through it. I grabbed my phone to call Marissa, but the screen flickered with static, then went black. That's when I saw the reflection in the darkened screen behind me. Something was standing in the corner, dripping water onto the carpet. My breath caught. It was tall, too tall to be human, its head brushing the ceiling, its body stretched and twisted, its skin pale like bloated flesh. Its eyes were 2 black hollows, and its mouth was open in an impossible soundless scream. The smell of stagnant river water filled my lungs, and before I could move, it stepped forward. I turned, but there was nothing there, just wet footprints leading to the closet. The next day I drove to the edge of town to stay with my cousin Jonah, thinking distance might help. Jonah lived in an old farmhouse that creaked at night, but it felt safer than my place. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. On my second night there, I woke to the sound of the wind rattling the windows, but then came the dripping again. Steady, slow, I sat up, and my breath froze in my throat. The dripping wasn't coming from inside the house. It was coming from above it. I grabbed Jonah's flashlight and climbed the attic stairs, each creak making my pulse race. When I pushed open the attic door, my light caught something hanging from the rafters, a chain, old and rusted, dripping water. Onto the wooden floor beneath it, there was a dark stain, and in that stain, the faint outline of a bare footprint. My skin prickled as the flashlight flickered, and in that half-second of darkness, I saw a man's face inches from mine. His eyes were sunken, his lips blue, and his skin stretched tight over his bones. "Come back," he whispered, his voice bubbling as if he were speaking underwater. I stumbled back, falling down the attic steps, but when Jonah came running, the chain was gone. The floor dry. Told him everything, and though he looked skeptical, he didn't laugh. He told me something his grandfather had said when he was a boy, how Tobias Crowe wasn't just a ghost, he was a keeper of debts anyone who came near his bridge owed him something, whether they knew it or not, and if you ignored him, he'd come to collect. Jonah begged me not to go near the bridge, but by then, I realized it didn't matter. I didn't have to go to him, he was already here. The following evening, I found a new Polaroid taped to Jonah's front door. In it, I was standing in the middle of the creek under hollow bridge, water up to my chest, my head tilted as though listening to someone whisper in my ear, but my eyes, they were black, completely black. Jonah wanted to burn it, but I wouldn't let him. Something told me destroying it would only make things worse. That night, I dreamt I was underwater looking up at the bridge from below. A figure was chained to a stone block beside me, his face hidden in shadow, but his voice was clear. "You're next." I woke gasping for breath, my lungs aching like I'd been holding them under for too long. My sheets soaked again. Jonah swore we should go to the sheriff, but I remembered what happened the last time I tried. The truth was, I didn't think there was a way out. I kept catching glimpses of him, Tobias, in reflections. In the bathroom mirror, in the dark glass of the TV screen, in the window of Jonah's truck, always standing behind me. Always dripping, always smiling with that empty, terrible grin, and every time I blinked he was gone. But each time he was closer. By the time the third week came, sleep had become impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I found myself back at Hollow Bridge, my feet sinking into the mud beneath the black water, my ears filled with the hollow gurgle of the creek. Tobias Crowe was always there now, standing at the edge, his chained hands dangling at his sides, his head cocked as if studying me like prey. The sound of his voice followed me into waking hours, sometimes a whisper, sometimes a deep rumbling echo that rattled my bones. Jonah tried to stay up with me at night, keeping all the lights on, but light didn't seem to matter. Shadows moved against the walls even when nothing in the room shifted. One night, as we sat in the living room, Jonah went pale, staring at something over my shoulder. "Don't move," he whispered, his voice breaking. My skin crawled as the air grew colder, my breath clouding in front of me. I felt the weight of water soaking into my clothes, though I was dry. Slowly, I turned, and there he was standing in the corner, taller than before, his head nearly scraping the ceiling. His chained hands twitched, and the smell of wet earth and rotting weeds filled the air, but worse were his eyes, black, endless pits that seemed to pull me forward. I couldn't look away. I took a step toward him, then another, and suddenly Jonah grabbed my arm, yanking me back. The thing vanished instantly, but the floor where it had stood was wet, puddled in the exact shape of 2 footprints. Jonah said nothing for a long time, just pacing, muttering under his breath, until finally he told me about a woman named Annabeth Lowe. Years ago, she had been found dead under the bridge, her lungs filled with water, but no sign she had fallen in. The sheriff had called it an accident, but Jonah's grandfather swore she had been chosen by Tobias. Chosen for what? I asked, but Jonah wouldn't answer. That night, I decided I couldn't just wait for him to take me. I had to find out what he wanted against Jonah's protests. I drove to Hollow Bridge just after midnight, the sky moonless, the road empty. The stone arch loomed ahead, its surface slick with moss, the creek below black as ink. I parked and walked to the middle, my boots echoing on the worn stones. The air was thick and wet, clinging to my skin. For a long moment there was only silence. And then a faint ripple in the water below, something pale surfaced, hands gripping the stones just like in the photograph. I froze as a head rose slowly from the water droplets, sliding off that waxy, bloated skin. Tobias's eyes locked on mine, and for the first time he spoke clearly, his voice carrying over the water. "Give me what's owed." My throat went dry. "I don't owe you anything," I managed to say, but he only smiled, a slow, terrible grin that stretched too wide. "You took her place." My stomach turned as the meaning sank in. Someone, maybe Marissa, maybe even Jonah, had been marked before me, and somehow I had stepped into their path. His grin widened until it split, revealing a darkness inside his mouth that was deeper than the night around us. The chains at his wrists rattled, and he began to pull himself up the stone, water spilling over the edge. I backed away, but my boots slipped on the wet moss, my heel caught the edge, and for one breathless second I thought I was going to fall backward into the water, but instead a hand shot out, not his, but Jonah's, grabbing me and pulling me back to the road. We ran without looking back, my lungs burning, the sound of chains dragging over stone following us all the way to the car. When we finally reached his house, I noticed my hands were trembling uncontrollably, and my jeans were soaked to the knees. Jonah stared at them, his face pale. "You were in the water," he said. I shook my head, swearing I hadn't fallen in, but he only looked at me with an expression I'll never forget, a mix of pity and terror. That night, as I lay on the couch, unable to sleep, I realized something horrifying. My hair was damp too, as if someone had been holding my head under water while I dreamed. The morning after the bridge, I woke to find Jonah gone. His truck was still outside, but his phone was on the kitchen table, the screen cracked and damp as though it had been submerged. I called his name until my throat hurt, searching every room in the house, but there was no sign of him until I checked the bathroom. The mirror was fogged over, though the shower hadn't been used, and in the condensation were 3 words, written in dripping lines: "You're too late." My chest tightened, my mind racing. I didn't want to believe it, but deep down I knew Tobias had taken him. I grabbed Jonah's keys and drove straight to Hollow Bridge, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. The air was colder there, the fog rolling in from the creek thick enough to swallow the road behind me. I stepped out and walked to the center of the bridge, calling Jonah's name. The only answer was the soft ripple of water below. Then something floated to the surface, a Polaroid, waterlogged but intact in it. Jonah stood waist deep in the creek, his head tilted back, his mouth open in a silent scream. Behind him, Tobias's chained hands rested on his shoulders. My own reflection stared back at me in the glossy surface of the photo, but my eyes were black. I don't remember dropping it, but it slid from my fingers into the water. "You took her place." Tobias's voice echoed again, but this time it wasn't from below. It was right behind me. I turned slowly, my breath catching in my throat. He was standing on the bridge, now taller and more terrible than ever, his skin hanging in folds, as if water had softened and rotted it for centuries. The chains dragged across the stones with a sound like grinding teeth. "You've been in my water," he said, each word bubbling up like air from the bottom of the creek. "You've seen my face. You can't walk away." My body screamed at me to run, but my legs refused to move. His eyes bored into mine, and for a moment I felt the strange pull I'd felt before, the desire to step forward to join him in the dark. But then somewhere deep inside, I heard Jonah's voice, urgent and panicked, telling me to fight. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the old rusted lighter Jonah always carried. My hands shook as I flicked at the tiny flame, trembling in the cold wind. Tobias tilted his head, almost curious, as I stepped toward the moss-covered edge of the bridge, where his hands had gripped so many times before. I didn't think. I just shoved the flame into the thick, wet moss. At first it sputtered, steam hissing into the air, but then to my shock, the moss caught and beneath it something else began to burn. The smell was foul, like burning hair and rotting weeds. Tobias roared a sound so loud it rattled the stones under my feet and staggered back, chains thrashing. The flames crawled along the edge of the bridge, licking at the stones, the light casting a shadow long and monstrous across the water. He stepped back toward the center arch, but his chains caught on the stone and began to pull, dragging him down toward the water. "It doesn't end," he hissed, his voice now a boiling gurgle. "You'll never be free." With one final ear-splitting scream, he toppled backward into the black water, the chains snapping taut before vanishing beneath the surface. The creek went still, the fog lifting just enough to see the opposite bank. My knees gave out and I collapsed, my breath, ragged tears streaming down my face. I don't remember driving back to Jonah's house, but when I did, it was silent. His truck was gone, this time as if he'd never been there. Days passed. I moved out of town, leaving everything behind. I told myself I'd escaped that. Tobias was gone, burned away under the bridge. But then one night in my new apartment, I woke to the sound of dripping water. My heart sank as I turned toward the closet. The floor was wet, and in the puddle a Polaroid floated face up. It was me sleeping in my bed, my head turned toward the closet, and in the darkness just beyond the closet door, 2 pale hands rested on the frame he had found me in. This time, I don't think I'll get away. Thanks for listening to my story. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share to hear more real horror stories like this one.